Brahmachari. Shri Radha Govinda Deva ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Garantarat Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Go Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading today from the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 15, entitled The Pandavas Retire Timely. And today we are taking a look at text number 14? Yeah. Oh yes, okay. 14, 1-4. 14. Okay. Yat bandhava kurubalaptim anantaparam. Yad bandhava kurupalabdim anantaparam. Ekoratena tatare hamatir yasatvam. Ekoratena tatare hamatir yasatvam. Pradyaritam bahudanam chamaya paresham. Pradyaritam bahudanam chamaya paresham. Tejaspadam manimayam charitam shirobhya. Tejaspadam manimayam charitam shirobhya. Yad bandhava kurubalabdimanantaparam. Ekoratena tatare hamatir yasatvam. Pratyaritam bahudanam chamaya paresham. Tejaspadam manimayam charitam shirobhya. Yad bandhava kurupalabdhimanantaparam. Ekoratena tatare hamatirya sattvam. Pratyaritam bahudanam chamaya paresham. Tejaspadam animayam charitam sirobhya. Yat bandhava, by whose friendship only. Kurubala abdim, the ocean of the military strength of the Kurus. Anantaparam, which was insurmountable. Eka, alone. Ratena, being seated on the chariot. Tatare, was able to cross over. Aham, myself. Atirya, invincible. Sattvam, existence. Pratyaritam, drew back. Bahu, very large quantity. Dhanam, wealth. Cha, also. Maya, by my. Paresham, of the enemy. Tejapadam, source of brilliance. Manimayam, bedecked with jewels. Cha, also. Ritam, taken by force. Shirobhya, from their heads. Translation. The military strength of the Kauravas was like an ocean in which there dwelled many invincible existences, and thus it was insurmountable. But because of his friendship, I, seated on the chariot, was able to cross over it. And only by his grace was I able to regain the cows, and also collect by force many helmets of the kings, which were bedecked with jewels that were sources of all brilliance. Purport. On the Kaurava side, there were many stalwart commanders like Bhishma, Drona, Kripa, and Karna, and their military strength was as insurmountable as the great ocean. And yet it was due to Lord Krishna's grace that Arjuna alone, sitting on the chariot, could manage to vanquish them one after another without difficulty. There were many changes of commanders on the other side, but on the Pandava side, Arjuna alone on the chariot driven by Lord Krishna could manage the whole responsibility of the great war. Similarly, when the Pandavas were living at the palace of Virata incognito, the Kauravas picked a quarrel with King Virata and decided to take away his large number of cows. While they were taking away the cows, Arjuna fought with them incognito and was able to regain the cows along with some booty taken by force, the jewels set on the turbans of the royal order. Arjuna remembered that all this was possible by the grace of the Lord. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitangscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavanishvare Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasari Ghora Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. The military strength of the Kauravas was like an ocean in which there dwelled many invincible existences, and thus it was insurmountable. But because of his friendship, I, seated on the chariot, was able to cross over it, and only by his grace was I able to regain the cows, and also collect by force many helmets of the kings, which were bedecked with jewels that were sources of all brilliance. So this verse is referring specifically to an instance where Arjuna fought against the Kurus, but before the Great War. So if we would go back to the famous gambling match where it was, the conspiracy was at a certain point the Pandavas, they built a city, a very wonderful city. And then Duryodhana's envy got quite, it was too much for him. Then they were scheming how exactly they want to take over the whole kingdom and not have the Pandavas also have a share. And then they arranged a gambling match in which Shakuni, who was the uncle of Duryodhana, and he was the brother of Duryodhana's mother, so Shakuni, and he was a very sly individual, and he had these magic dice, which were actually made of the knuckles of one of his uncles who died, but that's a whole other story. So it was these bejeweled dice. And he then said, and he was invincible in dice, because these dice, they followed his desire. So it was sort of like loaded dice, but something special. So then they arranged a gambling match against Yudhishthir. And at that point, Yudhishthir lost everything. And that's where the famous pastime happened, where even his wife was brought out because she had been lost. And then the whole question arose of, was it even proper? Is it possible that he could have lost her? That was the whole question that came up. Because he had already lost himself. He had put himself also on. He had lost his brothers, he had lost everyone. And then he lost his wife. And then the question was risen. Draupadi was in the assembly, and all the great kings were there. Bhishma was there, everyone. And she asked him, is this, what is happening now, is this proper? Is this dharmic? And no one knew exactly. Because that is what happens in the Mahabharata, that dharma, what is right or wrong, it again and again is brought up, that it is not so simple to understand what is right or wrong. Even in a culture where it is so clearly defined, dharma is very tricky. And the whole point of the Mahabharata, the whole mystery of the Mahabharata, is that it is revealed that actually dharma is Krishna's desire. That is actually what dharma, whatever Krishna desires, that is good. And in general, he has certain things. He doesn't want us to do this and wants us to do that. And that's why dharma has a stable structure also. But the actual specific thing is that it's dependent on Krishna's desire. So, but in any case, the gambling match happened. The Pandavas lost their kingdom. And in short, then they were exiled for 13 years. That was the deal. So they were exiled from their kingdom. And the last year of their exile, 13th year, they had to spend completely undetected. And if in that last year of their exile they were detected by anyone, then they would again be exiled for another 13 years. So that was the ploy of Duryodhana. He made the stakes in such a way that if they were lost, then the last 13 years he would somehow expose them, and then again they would be exiled, and in that way they would perpetually be in exile. So the Pandavas, they spent this 13 to 12 years, they spent in the forest. And they actually, it wasn't too bad, because if you have to remember, the Pandavas, they grew up in the forest. Yeah? They grew up, they didn't, when they were young, living with their father Pandu, they weren't actually living in the city, they grew up in the forest. So it was not very difficult for them. They actually grew up as yogis in their youth. So they were again living in the forest and had so many adventures in the forest. Part of the Mahabharata is called the Vana Parva, the time where they were living in the forest. But then the last year was approaching. So then they had to make a special plan to go completely incognito, to become hidden. So what they did is they all adopted fake identities. And they took shelter in the kingdom of Virata. So the kingdom, there was a great kingdom, Virata, a nice pious king. And they all adopted different identities. Yudhishthir, he adopted the identity of a courtier, like a person who is, in the ancient world, every day the kings would have their assembly in the parliament. And then there were different peoples that were there. For example, there's the jester. Like we know in European history, there was a jester. Even in the Vedic times, there was also jesters. So there would be these people. He was the only person who could make jokes with the king. No one else could do it. But the jester was there to soften the mood. And even the king, it gets a little boring if everybody the whole time is just treating with respect and reverence. So the jester, he could do these things. So in any case, you had these different people who were part of the court setup. So Yudhishthir, he went as a courtier, one of the individuals who were there as part of the court, in one sense like an entertainer or someone who was could tell stories or whatever it is. So he went in incognito, had his identity. Then Bhima went in as a cook. He went in as a great cook, because also he was a little fried out, because for the last 12 years they were living in the forest, and he was looking forward to some nice prasadam. So he decided he's going to go work in the kitchen, and then he can eat properly, because he used to eat quite a lot. And even while they were in the forest, the rule was that whatever they gathered the whole day, it was split in half, and Bhima could eat one half, and the rest of it was divided amongst the others, because what can we say, he had a big appetite. So Bhima went in as a cook. Then Nakula and Sahadev, they both went in. Nakula, I think, or Sahadev, one of the two, they both went in as experts in taking care of horses, and the one was expert in taking care of kine, or cattle. So in that way, because they had this special shakti with animals, both of them, and they went in. So they went in incognito. Then Arjuna went in, very interestingly, as a eunuch. So a eunuch, we know, is interesting part of royal life also, how you would sometimes have people who, even in the ancient world, oftentimes they would have young boys that they would castrate with a young age, and then they would be the attendants to the queen. Because how the palaces would work is that you had certain sections that were public for the men, and then you had the interior quarters of the palaces for the women. So in a big palace, even in ancient world, if you would see how they built the houses in ancient Roman or Greek times, you would see that an aristocratic person, or like middle class person, say whatever, someone who lives in the equivalent of a Long Island suburb or whatever, like a normal sort of, not like rich, but the average sort of someone who made it. So then they would have these houses that have two parts, two quarters. What do you call it in quadrants? Like squares, courtyards, two courtyards. So the front side of the house was for the men. That's where the men lived, and that was the public spaces where you would receive people, and that was the public courtyard. And then there was the back side, and that was for the women and the children. And no people could go there. Only the men couldn't go there. What to speak of guests? No women. It was considered in one sense like a contaminating feature to deal with the public, so austerity. So the women, they were protected, and they had their own courtyard at the back, and that was the courtyard where the children would be playing and whatever it is. And then at a certain point, when the kids grow up, the boys grow up, then they have to can't hang out at the back anymore. And then there would be the connecting section, and that's where there would be meals or cooking, or where the two sides of the house combine. And the palaces were the same, but obviously on a much bigger scale. So you would have big sections of the palaces that were just cordoned off for women and for the interior life of the palace. But then sometimes you had these male attendants. So then there had eunuchs who would then be, because then there would be no question of impropriety. Now, I don't think that in the Vedic culture they would necessarily have castrate them at a young age. That's maybe a little heavy. But you still see you have people who were, obviously, Arjuna went in as, one could say, like, he was clearly not a full man. He went in as Brihanala, he was a dance instructor. And he had like long hair and a ponytail, and he basically was very effeminate, like an effeminate man in one sense, and a dance instructor. And he became the dance instructor to the king's daughter, to the princess. Now, what was interesting is, why would Arjuna take such a strange identity? Well, because once when he visited the heavenly planets with Lord Krishna, which in the previous verse we heard that how they once went, he took Arjuna with him, even in his present body, he went into the heavenly planets. And there the heavenly planets are very interesting, because it's obviously, there is many beautiful women, the apsaras, the heavenly damsels, as we know, the singers and the entertainers. And amongst them there is one called Urvasi, a very famous lady, and who is the most beautiful of the damsels in Indra's court. And when she saw Arjuna, she was infatuated by him immediately. Even though he was a mortal man, still he was so extraordinary. And she courted him. But the thing is that she was, in one sense, she had also a relationship with Maharaj Yayati. I think it was Yayati.
It was she and
Pururava, yes, who was in one sense ancestor of Arjuna. So Arjuna, he saw Urvasi as his mother. He treated her as his mother. So when she approached him, he just folded his hands and he looked at her feet and he said, "Sorry, ma'am, but I cannot satisfy your desires." And she was so offended. She was so offended. I mean, number one, he's a mortal man, and then he is basically rejecting her. So she cursed him to become a eunuch for 1 year. So then Arjuna was thinking, well, this is my opportunity. I'm going to have to go incognito for a year. So I might as well take my curse of being a eunuch for 1 year. So then he did it. So then he went in as Brihanala. But then at a certain point, this Maharaj of this king of Virata, he was famous that many cows, like he was famous for massive herds of cows. So the Kauravas, they once came on the last day. Another few interesting things happened in the court of Virata, a few interesting things. So one was also, there's a story of how Draupadi, she went in as a chambermaid to the queen. So she went in as a maid servant under disguise, and then she got also a work in the palace, because it was decided better if she could work in the palace, it's more protected there. But in the end, it didn't work out so well, because the commander of the Virata's troops, he was completely attracted to Draupadi, and he again and again tried to seduce her. And even at a certain point, she ran away, and he chased her into the court, and he kicked her in front of the king. It was a big thing, so she was very offended. It was a very bad thing that happened, but no one did anything. But Bhima, she told Bhima, and she told him that, if you do not punish this person, then you are a eunuch. All my other husbands, they're useless. You have to do this. So then they made an arrangement that she told this person that she will meet him one night, late at night, in an isolated place. And Bhima was waiting there for him. And it's explained that Bhima crushed him into a ball, like a ball of flesh. He completely pulverized him, yeah. And they didn't even know who it was. They just saw it was a ball of flesh, basically, like a big, what do you call it, a meatball. So that's what happens. You have to be careful. So that was Bhima. So these are things, and then there's an interesting case also. There's a whole dialogue that also happens. So the interesting thing with the Mahabharata is there's the story, so you read the storyline, but if you actually read the full translation, which is available, the best translation in English is that by Ganguly, which is a full translation. So the Mahabharata has many thousands and thousands of verses, but what it is that most of it is dialogue. So certain events will happen, and then there will be a massive dialogue that is basically expounding philosophy based on the instance what is happening. So for example, you would have something happen, and there's a big dialogue about the question of what is right or wrong, and what is the nature of protection. And then there's these big dialogues that happen, and it is there actually that most of the philosophy in the Mahabharata is found. So very interesting. And obviously in this instance also very interesting things that come up to the surface. Now at a certain point then, the Kauravas, they attacked. They had some suspicion that the Pandavas were living in Virata's kingdom. They wanted to sort of they wanted to also usurp the cows of the king, because he had such massive hordes. So then, at a certain point, there was a battle that happened, and the whole army, the whole Kaurava army was there. And at that point, the king, he had left with his army to fight at another place. I don't remember how it happened, but somehow the king was not there. He was either fighting the Kaurava army on the other side or something like that. And then the Kauravas, they attacked the kingdom. And at that point, there was the son of Maharaj Virata, whose name was Uttara. Was a young boy, maybe 14 years old. And then he boldly proclaimed in the assembly that he will go out. He will fight the Kauravas. They do not have to fear. Somehow or other, he was just overtaken by a moment of insanity. But then he made his vow. So then he went. But then Brihanala, Arjuna, he knew what was happening. And that was also the last day that they would have to be incognito. So it was the last day they could actually fight. They would have to wait, just be not exposed for that last day, and then it was fine. So then he went to the king's son, and then he said, I'll go with you. So it was just Brihanala, a eunuch and a 14-year-old boy, a eunuch and a kid, who went out in a chariot. So the Mahabharata, it's a lot of humor actually in the Mahabharata. Like the scene, it's actually very funny. Like it's not just a serious story, it's completely ridiculous. It's like this massive eunuch with his long ponytail and his pink dress, and a little kid with a bow, probably can't even shoot properly. They're going out and they're going to face the whole Kaurava army. So at that point also, when the kid started to understand that this is a stupid idea, but Arjuna said, "Do not fear," and they went out. But when they went out, and he saw this army, then the son was, what am I thinking? This is ridiculous. And then there's a whole dialogue that takes place where Arjuna explains to him that it is better to die, that you have taken your promise. Now, even though you're going to do something very difficult, and you will most probably, the chances are that you will lose your life. There's a whole dialogue that takes place where he explains to him that it is better to die on the battlefield, better to die and keep your honor intact than surrender your honor, which is for the modern person a very difficult thing. For us, it's not. We don't really. We have some appreciation for it, and we like to see it in movies. But when we ourselves have to live it, it becomes very difficult, because one can imagine it's your life. You're not going to surrender your life just for the sake of your honor. So it is a very nice part of the Mahabharata that comes out there. And then what happened is they went out, and Brihanala, they had hidden their weapons in a tree, I think a sami tree or some kind of a tree, a specific tree, just outside the palace vicinity. So then he went there, he recovered his bow, and he recovered his flag. He had this empowered flag of Hanuman, like a flag that he would hoist on his chariot. And then he was ready for action. And then he single-handedly, he fought off these Kauravas. And this was them obviously also extremely humiliating, because it was clear that there was a eunuch that was fighting them. But they didn't understand what was happening. Obviously, at a certain point, they understood it must be Arjuna. And then, so he fought them off, he chased them away, he reclaimed the cows, and then he went back into the kingdom. At that point, the king also came back. And then the king was amazed, because it looked like it was his son that did this heroic feat. So then when they were in the court, then the king was praising the son, praising his own son, Uttara. And the son also, he was going along with it. But then Yudhisthira, he started to praise Brihanala, who was the chariot driver. And then the king got so offended that he threw him with, what was it again?
The gambling dice.
The dice, yeah. He threw him with the dice in his face. And his nose started to bleed. And then there was a big moment where it was explained, because Arjuna took a vow that whoever would draw blood from Yudhisthira, if it fell on the ground, if Yudhisthira's blood ever touched the ground, then Arjuna would kill him. There was no doubt about it. So then there was a whole incident. He had to make sure his blood didn't touch the ground, otherwise Arjuna would just slaughter the whole assembly. He was just, getting some Kleenex and making sure it didn't go to the ground. But then at that point also, then the next day, what happened is the Pandavas, then they went early into the assembly hall. And then they went in their royal dress, because they hadn't to be incognito anymore. And they sat on the throne of the king. They sat in this, and then the assembly came in. And they were like shocked, what's happening here? And then it was revealed to them that yes, we are the Pandavas, and we have been staying here. And the king he was very shocked. And then he asked for his severe forgiveness at the offenses that happened to them. And then also a whole dialogue takes place about how one has to be careful how you treat people, because you don't know exactly who they are. And it can only later be revealed unto you. Specifically also in our movement, this is very interesting, because you never know. You don't actually really know where people are in terms of how much love they have for Krishna. Very difficult to say. So always a wise policy to just treat everyone very nicely, just in case they are actually very exalted souls. So that was the story of Arjuna with King Virata. And now what is also very interesting, a final point, is that at that point, the king, he felt so bad, he had to do something to restore his position, and then he gave to Arjuna's son, Abhimanyu, he gave his granddaughter, or his daughter, in marriage, who was...
To Arjuna,
Yeah, Arjuna didn't... Oh yes, so he wanted to give his daughter to Arjuna, but Arjuna couldn't do it because he had been teaching dance to her for a whole year. So it was like his daughter. He had this whole teacher-disciple relationship with her. So then he said no, she should marry his son, Abhimanyu. And then who was their son? Maharaj Parikshit. Yes, so that was actually Maharaj Parikshit's mother. So Maharaj Parikshit's mother was this Uttara, who was then married to Arjuna's son, Abhimanyu. So that's where that happened. So obviously very nice because the story is being told by Shukadev again unto Parikshit. So that's how he met, how I met your mother, how that story happened. Okay. So let's see, are there any questions or any comments on the story that we heard today? Yes, Prabhu.
Arjuna became the Brahmachari, and they can identify this Kauravas. Then what about the Yudhishthira? What is his name became?
His name became something with a K, Kanta. Kanka, yes, Kanka. I don't know, they all had their own names and identities, and it was quite interesting.
I remember the meatball's name, Kichaka.
Kichaka, yeah, the meatball. Kichaka the meatball. Yeah, so in any case, nice, powerful story. And then after that, obviously, they exited their incognito status, and then soon after that, the war happened. And this Maharaj Virata, he actually fought on the side of Arjuna. He fought on the side of the Pandavas in the war, and he also lost his life within the war, unfortunately.
But what was the circumstances that Kauravas, they recognized that these were that were Arjuna, and that Duryodhana was just like running around to say yes, so we exposed them. So what? Do you remember what the details? Why actually they?
Yeah, the details were that as I understand it, the Brahmanas made a calculation of saying that it was to the day that the vow was made. So on that day, they already could not be revealed. So that there was some unsurety. Like for example, if you say for 13 years you have to do something. Well, so today is the 25th January. So does that mean is the 25th the last day, or is the 24th the last day? It was like it's not exactly sure. So, but the Brahmanas consulted and they said no, it's fine. So there was again some contention. Again, the same thing coming up. Like what is right or wrong is not always so clear. But then they consulted the Brahmanas. At least that's as I understand it. But there could also be different angles of vision on that.
And then I think it was Draupadi. Her story was she's married to Gandharvas. It was like
Yeah.
everyone was like, okay, she's married to Gandharvas. Nobody sees her husband.
Yeah.
Nobody touches her.
Yeah.
But that guy was just ostentatious. He just wanted to.
Yeah. And then he was killed, and then she said it was her husband who killed him. And then she actually came into a lot of trouble. They actually wanted to punish her.
Yeah, people were chasing her.
They were chasing her, yeah. And then that's a whole discussion that also came out about retribution and the nature of guilt and innocence, especially in the ancient world, which was a little different than we have today. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Mahabharat ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Go Premanande.